Vendor references are useless unless you know the one question that gets past the scripted answers. Vendors give you their happiest customers, pre-coached on what to say. You call and you hear, "Great vendor, very happy," and learn absolutely nothing. You're about to make a multi-million-dollar decision based on information designed to deceive you, not maliciously, structurally. Let me show you how to get past it. You're about to make a multi-million-dollar decision that could be a mistake based on information designed to deceive you. You're about to make a multi-million-dollar decision based on one phone call that is designed to deceive you, not maliciously, structurally. What'll happen is you'll end up buying a product that doesn't work for you. So here's the question. Write this down. If you could go back to day one and change one thing about how you approached this project with this vendor, what would it be? Look at what this question does. It doesn't ask if they're satisfied. Of course they'll say they're satisfied. The vendor picked them because they're satisfied. Asking, "Are you happy?" gets you nothing. It doesn't ask about the vendor directly. It asks about their own approach. That feels safer to answer, honestly. It's self-reflection, not criticism. But here's the magic. Any complaint about the vendor comes out as something they would have done differently. If I would have pushed back harder on the timeline, means the vendor's timeline might have been unrealistic. I would have gotten the implementation team named in the contract, means the vendor staffed them with B players. And if you want to learn more about this specific issue, click on this video. I would have documented our requirements more precisely, means the vendor exploited ambiguity. People will tell you things in response to this question that they'd never say if you asked directly. Let me tell you how this worked for one agency. They were evaluating 3 ERP vendors, down to 2 finalists, about to make a $3 million decision, and that's just year one. They called the references for their leading candidate, the vendor that had demoed the best, priced the best, seemed more responsive. So the first reference, they asked the question. So there was a pause on the other end, and then they answered. If I could go back, I would have pushed back harder on their implementation timeline. They said 14 months. We said that felt aggressive, and they assured us it was achievable. It took 22 months. We should have trusted our instincts. 8 months late. That's not a minor miss. Second reference, same question. I would have gotten specific people named in the contract. The team that sold us was fantastic. The team that implemented us was less so. Different project manager, different consultants, less experience. So if I could go back, I'd make them commit to specific individuals. Classic bait and switch. A team sells, B team delivers. Third reference. Honestly, I'm not sure. I would have selected this vendor again. The system is fine, it works, but the implementation was brutal. The relationship was adversarial for most of it. I don't know if a different vendor would have been better, but I'd want to find out. Now, that's a vendor-chosen reference saying, I might not choose them again. So they asked the runner-up vendors' references the same question. The answers were completely different. I would have involved our department heads earlier. We waited too long to get their input, and we had to backtrack. I would have allocated more time for testing. We compressed it too much at the end. I would have invested more in training. We underestimated how much people would struggle. Now notice, these are lessons about their own behavior, not complaints about the vendor. The vendor didn't create these problems, the agency did. That's a completely different signal than the vendor missed by 8 months and swapped out the team. They went with the runner-up. The implementation wasn't perfect. They're never perfect. But it went reasonably well. They later heard that the original leading vendor's next implementation at another agency also went poorly. One question, different outcome. So let me tell you about another agency's reference call, because there's an art to listening that matters as much as the questions you ask. Agencies evaluating payroll vendors. It was an agency evaluating payroll vendors. Very high stakes. Payroll is very high stakes. As you know, payroll is not where you want problems. So the evaluator called a reference. Started with standard questions. Everything sounded positive on the surface. The reference was polite, professional, said the right things. But she started noticing patterns in the language. So when asked about the implementation, the reference said, well, we made it work. It was hard, but we made it work. When asked about a specific module, the reference said, well, there are ways around that, but it works. When asked about the learning curve, the reference said, you get used to it. It's hard, but we make it work. Ways around that, you get used to it. Those are red flags. Those tell something isn't quite right. A happy customer says, it works great. An unhappy customer who's trying to be nice and diplomatic says, we make it work, or we made it work. So she probed, you mentioned you made it work with the scheduling module. Can you tell me more? What are you doing that you wish the system handled better? And the dam broke. The scheduling module couldn't handle their shift differentials, different pay rates for evening and weekend shifts. The system calculated it wrong. So they calculated outside the system and entered adjustments manually. 2 hours every payroll cycle. They'd been asking the vendor to fix it for 2 years, still not fixed. She asked, what else are you working around? The garnishment processing was clunky, required manual intervention for complex cases. A required state report couldn't be generated directly. They exported to Excel and reformatted every quarter. Onboarding new employees required entering information in 3 different places because integrations weren't working right. So none of this came up in the "Are you satisfied?" conversation. The reference had said, yes, she was satisfied. She wasn't lying. She had made peace with the problems. She had found workarounds, but she had problems. The evaluator only discovered them because she noticed linguistic cues and probed. So what do you listen for? Hedging language. It works for most things. We manage. There was a learning curve. These are invitations to dig deeper. Qualifiers. Overall, we're happy. What about specifically? The support is usually responsive. When isn't it? Passive voice. Passive voices. Mistakes were made instead of they made mistakes. People use passive voice to avoid assigning blame directly. Now remember, if you've been through a 2-year-long implementation with this vendor and you were in the trenches with them, you make friends. You become war buddies, right? So you don't want to throw people under the bus, people that you like. You may not like the brand or the software, but you liked Becky that helped you through this mess. So people use passive voice to avoid assigning blame directly. If they're pausing, if someone pauses before answering, they're choosing their words carefully. Something is left unsaid. So then there's the enthusiasm differential. If they're enthusiastic about the software, love it, but lukewarm about the vendor or the SI, notice that. If they love their internal team but are neutral about the vendor's people, notice that. Your job on a reference call isn't just to ask questions, it's to listen, really listen for what's being communicated between the words. So let me give you 10 questions specifically designed to get past these niceties and platitudes and surface real information. Question 1. Walk me through the implementation timeline. What were the major phases and how long did each actually take? This gets specifics, not how was the timeline, but walk me through it. When they walk through it, you'll hear where things slowed down. Phase 2 was supposed to be 3 months, but we hit some issues with data conversion and it stretched to 5 months. Now you know data conversion was a problem. Probe further. Ask the next level of questions. Question 2. What surprised you about working with this vendor, positive or negative? Surprise is a great word because it creates psychological safety. You're not asking them to criticize. You're asking about expectations versus reality. Positive surprises are nice. Negative surprises tell you where the vendor under-delivered on promises. Question 3. Who were the key people on the vendor side? How would you rate their individual contributions? This reveals whether the team was strong or weak, and it surfaces the bait and switch problem. Our project manager was great. Some of the consultants were newer. That tells you something. If they can't remember the vendor team members' names, that's also informative. It might mean high turnover or lack of engagement. Question 4. When things went wrong, and things always go wrong, how did the vendor respond? Framing normalizes problems and makes it easier to discuss them. But what you want to know is, did they own it? Did they fix it? Did they blame you? Did they charge you extra? How a vendor handles problems tells you more about how they handle success. Question 5. What did you spend beyond the original contract? What drove the additional costs? Direct question about change orders and overruns. Every project has some additional costs. What matters is how much and why. We added scope, so we expected the increase. That's fine. Every time we turn around, something else was out of scope and we got a change order. That's a problem. Question 6. What does your ongoing relationship look like now that you're live? How would you characterize vendor support? Some vendors are fantastic during implementation. They want the reference, and then they disappear after. What's support like post-go live? How quickly do they respond? Do they actually resolve issues or just close tickets? Question 7. What functionality didn't work as advertised? What did you expect that the system could do? Every system has features that demo well, but don't work well in practice. Every system has limitations that weren't obvious during evaluation. This question surfaces them. Question 8. How has your staff adapted? What's their satisfaction level with the new system? End users experience the system differently than project managers and directors and leadership. If leadership loves it, but the staff hates it, that's a problem. A system that people resist using doesn't deliver value. Question 9. Knowing everything you know now, would you make the same selection decision? Binary but powerful. Yes, absolutely. Great. I think so. Any hesitation at all? Probe. Question 10. If you could go back to day one and change one thing about how you approach this project with this vendor, what would it be? The money question. Use it every time. Use it last, after you've built rapport and they're comfortable talking. And here's how you interpret what you hear. Listen for consistency across references. If 3 references independently mention the same concern, timeline problem, staff turnover, change orders, that's a pattern, that's real. Trust specifics over impressions. Implementation took 22 months against a 14-month plan is more valuable than it took longer than expected. Note what they don't say. If you ask about support and they pivot to talking about software, maybe support isn't great. If you ask them about the team and they praise the software instead, maybe the team wasn't impressive. And remember, these are the customers the vendor chose to show you. The hand-picked references have concerns. Imagine what the other customers think. And here's a few more bonus tactics to get better reference information. Don't just call vendor-provided references. Ask those references. Who else in your region uses this system? Do you know anyone else I could talk to? Find references the vendor didn't choose. Look for user groups. Check LinkedIn for people who have worked with the system. Search for conference presentations. A reference the vendor didn't pick might give you a very different perspective. Talk to end users, not just project leaders. The project manager has invested in the decision. They made it. They want it to be seen as successful. The AP clerk, on the other hand, has no real investment. She just knows whether it works or not. She'll tell you. So ask the reference, could I speak briefly with one of your end users? Someone who uses the system daily? Schedule adequate time. 15 minutes isn't enough. You need 30 to 45 minutes to get past the pleasantries and into the real conversation. Schedule it like a meeting. Get on their calendar and don't rush. You could also send questions in advance, selectively. For straightforward questions, sending them ahead lets the reference prepare. They'll have more specific answers. But don't send the "what would you change" question. You want their unrehearsed, honest response. So next time you're evaluating vendors, use these techniques, especially the "what would you change" question. Ask it of every reference for every vendor. And go beyond vendor-provided references. Find your own. The information you get will be different. Tell me in the comments, what's the most revealing thing you've ever learned from a reference call? What question got you the answer? Thanks for watching. References can be genuinely valuable, but only if you extract the value. The information is out there, and the reference knows things that would help you. You just have to ask in ways that let the truth emerge. If you want to learn more about structuring effective technology evaluations, including how to write RFPs, click on this video.